بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا تقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. Together. يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبت وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد للذنوب غافرة ولا لقبائحي ساترة ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك. Together. ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط به سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهواه وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي مؤتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شدي وثاقي يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك الصادقة وبشكرك مادحة وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، وعلى أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل والحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك، وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك، أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء عفوك. فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك، أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يامل فضلك ورحمتك، أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه، أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه، أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه، أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه، أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتترك فيها. هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عاملته، كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشتد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أصرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء. يا سابغ النعام، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والآئمة الميامين من آله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So inshallah, tonight I want to wrap up the discussion of whether or not Ijtihad is permissible or not. We've had enough discussion on this, I understand, and there's one more reason. So far we've gone through one reason why we don't believe this is the case, that Ijtihad is impermissible, because one of the main arguments for those who were anti-Ijtihad, I don't like to use that word, who didn't feel that Ijtihad is permissible, we said that it was because the usage of this term has undergone evolution. We talked about this in depth. I shared excerpts with you from different books, and of course those are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more out there actually. We don't want to spend any more time on that. There's a second reason why Ijtihad is permissible, or in other words, let's say it like this: there's a second answer that can be given to this whole argument of, when we look pre-Muhaqqiq Hilli times, when we look at the classical scholars, the fathers of Shi'ism, such as At-Tusi and those ones, we find that they were anti-Ijtihad. When we look at their excerpts, when we look at their works and books, that was the argument, right? One of the main arguments. The second answer that can be given to this argument, in addition to the fact that the usage of the term Ijtihad has undergone evolution, is the fact that we have these same individuals. What are they doing? They are writing books on usul al-fiqh. If you remember last week, when we got into what Ayatollah Khou'i and others, they express as the conditions for, and the prerequisites, let's call it, for ijtihad. What were they? There were 3 or 4, not too many. He kept it at a minimum. Arabic language, which encompasses a lot of things, but also he ruled out some parts of Arabic grammar. Those parts that have to do with eloquence and badi' and ma'ani, those kinds of things, those sciences. He said, look, morphology, you can identify the words, you can identify the sentences, correct? And you have an idea of how this Arabic language works, the vocabulary and so on. That's enough, he says, when it comes to the Arabic. But then he said that we also have to go to usul al-fiqh and rijal. We talked about these last week in depth. I gave you a lot of examples, and if you were kind of lost in those examples, it's fine, because these are technical terms. These are technical terms within that science, so we don't necessarily expect us to understand all of it, although I tried to give you examples for each one and explain each one. So if you remember, usul al-fiqh, as I said, was one of those sciences. And I explained how when you go to sources, when you go to texts and literature, in order to decipher the literature, you have to have this usul al-fiqh. There's a million questions that come up when you go to the sources. And the science for that is usul al-fiqh. Now, lots of these rules that are discussed in usul al-fiqh are rules that have to do with the intellect, the aql. They're not something that you have a hadith for. So for example, if I have an amr, I gave this example last session, right? If I have an amr, which says, for example, which means command, which says, do this, don't do that, okay? Pray. When it says pray, this is a command. Do I understand wujub from this or istihbab from this? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or one of the imams tells me that pray, well, there's mustahab prayers, there's wajib prayers. What is meant here exactly? Do you mean pray as in it's wajib on me to pray? Or when you say pray, that means it's mustahab for me to pray. You have to be able to determine which one is it. And so for this, you need usul al-fiqh. That's just one example, right? Okay, I gave lots of examples last week. Now, lots of these will not have hadith for it. You won't have a hadith that says when a command comes to you, it's wajib on you. That's the default. You won't have a hadith or a verse of Quran for this. You have to use this guy right here, which is called the aql, okay? And come to a conclusion. What is the default when the literature tells me, do this? Is it wajib? Or it can be, no, it's not wajib. It's encouraged, but it's not necessarily wajib. What is it that we go to and resort to? Aql. Now, this usul al-fiqh, I want you to understand, brothers and sisters, if someone writes a book on usul al-fiqh, they are probably pro-ijtihad, not anti-ijtihad. So now, having said that, and I'll get into more details later, and this is where the whole difference between usulis and akhbaris comes into the picture. Have you ever heard this? You've heard this terminology or not? This person's akhbari, this person's usuli. The opposite of akhbari, those who are not pro-ijtihad in the way that the normal conventional maraja have it, the ones who are anti that are called akhbari. What's the opposite of it? Usuli, which means what? Which means they believe in usul al-fiqh, the version that all these ulama discuss. So, if a person has a book on usul al-fiqh, it's going to be very hard to label them as anti-ijtihad. Let's get to some names here. So for example, you have a Shaykh al-Mufid. What's his book? And it's interesting when you look at these books and the discussions that are there. Shaykh al-Mufid has a book called At-Tadhkira bi Usul al-Fiqh. Okay, At-Tadhkira bi Usul al-Fiqh, which means a reminder of Usul al-Fiqh. Okay. Now the book itself, we don't have access to it, but an abridged version of this book, someone else has brought it in their book. Okay, in the book of Kanzul Fawaid, it's called. So, and his name is Karajaki. So this person has brought an abridged version of that book, which we have access to. The abridged version, we have it. But it's what's the topic of this book? Usulul fiqh. A person who's against ijtihad is not going to write a book on usulul fiqh. Another name, Sayyid al-Murtada. I mean, his book is very famous. Al-Dhari'a ila usul al-fiqh. This is one of the main books out there. Like, it's one of those main books that stand out. It's on usul al-fiqh. Sayyid al-Murtada was one of the ones, just like Shaykh al-Mufid, that was quoted to say, I am anti-ijtihad. And so our argument was what? When he says I'm anti-ijtihad, what is meant by ijtihad is the non-Shia version of ijtihad. The ijtihad that says any form of conjecture that you are able to achieve is enough for you. Even if it's through the means of something like qiyas, something like istihsan, and so on. We've talked about this again and again. So if Shaykh Mufid, Sayyid al-Murtada, for example, these people are saying we are anti-ijtihad, but they have a book on usul al-fiqh, we have a problem here. We have a discrepancy. The only way out of this discrepancy is to say what? When they said I'm anti-ijtihad, not the ijtihad that encompasses usul al-fiqh and is the general usage of the term, but rather that specific ijtihad that we're against as well. Another book, Al-Shaykh al-Tusi, this is a beast of a book, Uddatul Usul. Everyone knows this book. Now it's interesting, when you look in the discussions within these books, you think that this is Ayatollah Khui's book. Ayatollah Khui was a huge usuli. Okay? You will think that this is Ayatollah Khui's book. The discussions there's a big overlap. There's like 20 or 30 discussions just on amr, commands. Like what we get out of a amr. What do we understand from it? Nahi. And those other things that I talked about last week. All of those discussions are there as well. You think it's Ayatollah Khui. Ayatollah Khui, everyone knows, is usuli. So, how is it that some are arguing that these people were anti-ijtihad, but they have books on usul al-fiqh like this, with such discussions, tens and tens of the same discussions that we have in our books of the 20th and 21st century of usul al-fiqh. That those who are not pro-ijtihad will call out those discussions. They'll say, no, this is too much. Okay? And so this shows, brothers and sisters, that today when you go, for example, to Dars al-Kharij, okay, and you find that they're discussing usul al-fiqh in this 21st century, let's say, and deep discussions. And I don't want to disagree with some of those who believe that usul al-fiqh today is a little inflated, it's a little too much sometimes. I'm not going to disagree with them. There is a discussion there. But all in all, when you look at these, let's just call it inflated discussions on usul al-fiqh, you find that it is a continuation of the legacy of the Mufids, of the Tusis and Sayyid al-Murtadas. They've laid the bricks and foundations for these discussions today. And then all of a sudden I'm going to come and say they are anti. It doesn't add up, brothers and sisters. So to conclude from all of this, you can't be anti-ijtihad but believe in usul al-fiqh. You just can't. Usul al-fiqh means ijtihad. Okay? And that's why the usuliyun are called usulis. They believe in usul al-fiqh, and they are the opposite of akhbaris who are anti-ijtihad. Although I don't like to call them that, but ijtihad in its conventional sense of the term today. Okay? They don't agree with everything in usul al-fiqh. Now I don't want to say they have no usul al-fiqh at all, but there are many discussions that they might disagree with, as is in the detailed books that we don't want to get into. Shaykh al-Ansari, Wahid al-Bahbahani, they have addressed these issues in their books. Alright. So you can't have an usul al-fiqh book and be anti-ijtihad. As a matter of fact, look at this now. Shaykh al-Ansari and the likes of him, they've actually in their books used these terms interchangeably. They sometimes call those who are on the opposite of akhbaris, they call them not just usulis, they call them mujtahids as well. Look at that. So if you're a usuli, that means by default you are a mujtahid. You're seen as a mujtahid in the eyes of the scholars. Okay? Ijtihad and proponent of usul al-fiqh, these are synonymous. Okay? And so if someone ever says that a person like Shaykh al-Tusi was anti-ijtihad, what they're actually saying is that he was an anti-ijtihad mujtahid. That's what they're saying. Because of the fact that he has usul al-fiqh in his arsenal of sciences that he discusses and teaches. So to summarize these last 3, 4, 5 sessions that we've had on this, the whole thing goes like this, brothers and sisters, that there's a sentiment out there that says, look, ijtihad is something that is not acceptable in Islam. Why? When we look at the classical scholars, what are they doing? They are all saying that it's problematic. We said that there was an evolution of the usage of this term. That's one of our reasons and answers to this question of, hey, why did the classical scholars scold ijtihad? Because that was their usage in their time. It evolved, and post-Muhaqqiq Hilli times it was used for other purposes. That's number one answer we give. Second answer we give is that the same ones that we cite, or you might cite, and say that they were anti-ijtihad, the answer is that they had usul al-fiqh discussions just like today. And so if someone's going to be against them, they either have to be akhbari, or they have to concede that, look, ijtihad didn't mean the same thing in their books. Okay? So that is the summary of this discussion altogether. Now moving on to another discussion that we have. If you can move to the next slide. We're moving on from this discussion that we spent 4 or 5 sessions on. Now we move into some introductory points, some points that we need to figure out first before we get into the whole process and methodology of ijtihad. Okay? Before we get into all the different discussions regarding Quran, regarding hadith and so on, before we get into that, we have to figure out what we're after exactly, what's going on. And so the discussion of tasweeb and takhti'ah comes into the picture. Now these are frightening words, I understand. Okay? But if I tell you the root of each of those two words and terms, you won't be so scared anymore. The first one, tasweeb. Tasweeb comes from sawab with a sad, not with a tha that we pronounce in Farsi or in Urdu as sa. No. Sawab with a sad means correctness. In the Quran we have it, وَقَالَ صَوَابًا. On the Day of Judgment, if anyone's going to talk, all they say is truth. There's no lying on the Day of Judgment. Okay? إِلَّا مَنْ أَذِنَ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنُ وَقَالَ صَوَابًا. On the Day of Judgment, if anyone's going to speak, the Rahman gives anyone permission to speak, they will speak. But what will they say? قَالَ صَوَابًا. Only truth. Not sawab with a sa, with 3 dots on it. Sawab with a sad. Thawab means rewards. Sawab means correctness, rightness. Okay? Tasweeb comes from sawab. Tasweeb means to consider something and label something as correct and accurate. Okay? On the flip side, you have takhti'ah. Takhti'ah comes from khata. Or in Urdu, what do we say? Khata, right? So what do we say? I looked it up, that's what Google Translate said it. So khata or khata means error. Takhti'ah means to consider something erroneous. All right? So we have these 2 terms now. But they have a specific usage in fiqh and usulul fiqh. Okay? What does that mean? What's going on here? Let us start the discussion with a question. If 2 mujtahids now, we talked about ijtihad, we talked about its permissibility, 2 people go, they do their work, they discuss usulul fiqh, they come to their conclusions and come up with their rules that they want to approach the literature with. Now each of them goes to the literature, comes up with a different fatwa. Okay? One says, when you're praying 3 rak'ah, 4 rak'ah prayer, tasbihat arba'a have to be said once. Another one says, no, I am convinced that it has to be 3 times, or else your salah is not valid. Alright, now you tell me, brothers and sisters, can it be both? Can both be right, or one has to be right? Sounds like a dumb question, correct? Can both, or let's talk about the lobster one, something that we can relate to better. One says lobster's halal, one says lobster's haram. Alright, can both of these be correct? So everyone says no, it can't. It sounds like a dumb question, but it needs to be discussed because if someone laughs at this question, it shows that they are basing what their laughter on an assumption that they have. We have to see, does everyone agree with this assumption or presumption or not? That's the question. Although it sounds very clear and something that's not, we don't even need to discuss, but no, we need to get to something here and figure something out so that when we talk about hujjiyah, which we'll probably talk about next week, or the week after if we don't have anything next week, because next week, is Thanksgiving, and people are going to probably have more important things to do. So, we'll have to see. If we figure this out today, what exactly matters in all of this, what is all of this based on, then we can talk about hujjiyah, inshallah. So this is what that's going to lead to. But for now, we're in tasweeb and taqtiyah. Yes, brother. Mm-hmm. What if both say, this is my fatwa, this is my understanding, this is what the literature says. The brother says, what if one of these maraji bases his fatwa on ihtiyat, which means he doesn't have a fatwa. But the other one says, I have a fatwa that it's halal. This is okay, there's no problem. And I agree with you. That is it's not going to be a dumb question at all, according to some. But the question is this. Someone might ask this question that, what if both of them are saying, no, we have a fatwa on this. This is what the sources are telling me, which is really the case. Ayatollah Fadlullah, his fatwa was that lobster is halal. But other maraja, their fatwa is that it's haram. So the question begs to be asked, can both of them be right? And some might say that this is not a very smart question. Of course they're not both right. One is right, one is wrong. One got it right, one got it wrong. That should be, that's what usually you'll get as an answer. What I'm saying now is this. This is based on, the clearness of the answer to this question is based on a presumption that we have. That presumption is that we are assuming that there is a real waqi'i hukum out there, which is in Allah's knowledge, which Allah has legislated. Now we're trying to reach that rule. Some of us might hit, some of us might miss. Okay? If we have such an assumption or presumption, this question will be a very weak question. But this is the thing, brothers and sisters. Not everyone believes in this. And that's why this discussion comes. And if you go look into all of these usul books, usul al-fiqh books, or Ijtihad and Taqlid books that are out there, this is discussed right in the beginning. As one of those preliminary points and discussions before getting into Ijtihad and Taqlid, before getting into usul al-fiqh and so on. Okay? Where does this all stem from? Well, when you say are both right, can both be right, quote unquote, depends what your definition of right is. Okay? If there is an actual, real ruling out there that Allah has in mind, okay, that makes perfect sense. And so some of us will hit that target, some of us will miss that target. Those of us who miss that target, we are, as mujtahids, we are excused. We have an excuse. We tried our best, we failed. We failed the target, we missed the target. Not that we failed in our ijtihad, that was our ijtihad. We failed in hitting the target, correct? Okay. But some might say there is no reality. There is no real hukum. Allah has given us ahkam, but when we don't have the ruling on lobster, let's say, when we don't have the ruling on smoking, let's say, meaning we don't have Quran or Hadith that tell us about it, then that means that there is no rule here for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The slate is clean actually. He is waiting to see what I arrive at as a mujtahid. I use my mind, I come up with a conclusion, and because of that, Allah will have a ruling based on what I come to. This is not what the Shia believe though, I will tell you right away, okay? Before I'm taken out of context. This is not what the Shia school believes in, but there is an opinion out there that either Allah doesn't have a ruling at all to begin with those things that you don't have Quran or Hadith for, or even if He has a ruling in mind but it never reached you, He will erase and change it. Okay? And we'll put down what the mujtahid has come to. If this mujtahid said, well, smoking has smoke. Smoke is like steam, as we said before, and so breathing steam is halal, so breathing smoke is also halal. Breathing smoke and inhaling it is also okay. Does qiyas, does the problematic ijtihad that we've talked about over the past few sessions. Here they'll say, some will say, there was no ruling to begin with in Allah's knowledge. Allah places that as the ruling. And so, because there is no actual waqi'i ruling, it becomes something subjective. There might be two correct rulings. As many as opinions there are out there, there are correct opinions. This is what tasweeb means. To say each rule is sawab, is correct. On the flip side though, does the Shi'i school believe in this? Not necessarily. The Shi'i school is mukhatti'ah. We are the mukhatti'ah. By the way, before I go on, this tasweeb has its own grades. There are different grades. They're not all the same. Some might accept a certain form of tasweeb, some might not. But all in all, that's what tasweeb is. But on the flip side now, when we have takhti'ah, takhti'ah means that no, you can be wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. Now, there are some who will find fault and problem in this. They'll say when you're okay to be wrong in your ijtihad, that means God is sanctioning a methodology for you that sometimes does not hit the target, which means if you get it wrong, you, those who are following you, or you yourself who has this opinion, is now missing out on certain things because you thought they're not wajib, but they were wajib. Things that were very important. Or people are falling into haram when they don't know it's haram because your fatwa and your opinion was it's not wajib, or it's not haram, excuse me. There are issues that come up. Well, those issues can be discussed later. But for now, brothers and sisters, and we have answers to those, lots of nice answers to those. But for now, brothers and sisters, what we have is this, that there's an opinion also out there that says, no, you can go wrong, you can miss the target, and you will be excused on the Day of Judgment because you tried your best. I mean, you didn't have ilm al-ghayb, you weren't infallible, you missed the target, that's fine, you're excused. And Allah will make up for that which you missed. You missed, this salat was wajib on you, you thought it was mustahab. Allah will make up for that in one way or another. There are different things, different discussions that we have in this regard, and different answers that are given to this problem. Okay, but all in all, yes, God has rules set in stone. We're aiming for those, and so this is where the Shi'i school of thought, their opinion comes in. Okay, and then I'm going to get to the bullet point that talks about how whether this is a fiqhi matter or it's a theological matter. We'll get to that. I'm skipping that right now. I'll go back to it. The Shi'i school of thought that says that it's set in stone, it says that, look, whether or not we have knowledge of that ruling doesn't change anything. Even if you have shak in that ruling, you don't know it, it never reached you. Those rulings are there and they apply to you. We have to understand this. They apply to you. Allah is watching you to see if you're doing that salat that's wajib on you or not. Although your ijtihad has told you it's mustahab. Okay? But you are excused. Okay, so it's still applicable to you. Our knowledge of rulings has nothing to do with whether or not those rulings exist or not. They are there whether you like it or not. You are excused if you don't perform according to those rulings. And so Islam has rulings for all scenarios. We don't have the right to exercise ra'i, qiyas, and that problematic ijtihad that we talked about before. Not the right one, the wrong one. We don't have any right to do that. Others are saying no. Some, we're not going to say all of the Sunni school and the Sunni fiqh, not all of it, but some of it will say, no. When there's no ruling in the Quran and Hadith, you will do your ijtihad, and as a result, that will be what is now carved into that slate and will become the ruling. There's a big difference here, brothers and sisters. There's a big difference. Now, parentheses. There is a discussion here now. We said the Shi'i school will say that Allah has rules for all scenarios. There is a discussion here as well I don't want to get into, but the mainstream believes that yes, Islam has a ruling for every scenario, everything. Whether it's a specific ruling or a general one. For example, everything is halal until you don't know it's haram. And so if we don't know if smoking is halal or not, let's apply that. The examples we talked about before. Okay. Now, this discussion, one might ask, where does it come into the picture? What kind of discussion is this? Is this a fiqhi one, or is this more than that? The minimum, the least that you can say is it's a fiqhi one. The fuqaha of and the mujtahideen of Ahlus Sunnah, and I'm basing this off of the books that I've looked at, okay? Of the Shi'i books that I've looked at, that they're saying that this is a Sunni thing, okay? That's what I'm basing it off of. Those books that I've said in the past that we'll be doing this course on, that we'll be using for. So they're saying that it's a fiqhi matter for sure, but for some it goes a bit further as well. It goes a step further. What is it? They have said, like Ayatollah Burujerdi the Great, okay? He has in his book of Usul, Nihayatul Usul, I think it was called. Over there he says, look, this is not just a fiqhi matter. This is a theological matter. I don't know if any of you, if it crossed your mind as I was explaining the whole discussion here, but when you hear these words like, hey, this person is a mujtahid, they tried their best to get it right, but they missed, so they're still right though. What does this remind you of a little bit? He says, what this reminds me of, is a rule called Adalat al-Sahaba. Okay? And it goes back to the old discussion and difference of opinion the Shi'i school has with the Sunni school, of course, regarding the companions of the Prophet, whether or not all of them are right or not. Ayatollah Burujerdi, you know what he says? This is him talking now. I haven't checked others. He says that the roots of this idea of tasweeb, you find it in this theological understanding of all Sahaba are right. What's the discussion there? You all know probably that you cannot question any of the Sahaba. But sometimes they had different opinions. Sometimes they even went to war with each other. So which one is right? What you'll find is that you won't find, usually you'll find a hesitation to say one side is right or wrong. And so, for example, I've seen some Wahhabi sheikhs say this. They'll say that, for example, in the Battle of Siffin, Imam Ali was closer to the truth, Muawiyah was farther away from the truth. Well, just say he was wrong. They'll say, he says, no, there was one group that was right, and that was the likes of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, because they didn't take any sides at all, and they stayed away from the whole conflict. Okay? Anyway, we don't want to get all riled up here or anything. Just all in all, we have to understand that he believes that it goes beyond fiqh. It goes beyond all of that, because some got stuck in this idea of, well, how do we justify the big differences of opinion between the Sahaba? They'll say, well, all of them were mujtahids. They each had their ijtihad. They came to their conclusions. And so, if they were right, then you give them one. If they were right, they get 2 rewards. If they were wrong, they got 1 reward. But the question is this. The fact that you're just saying one was right and one was wrong shows that there's a right and there's a wrong. So there's hadiths by Abu Hurairah and others that, yes, the mujtahid gets 2 rewards if they hit the target, and if they missed and they were wrong, they get 1 sawab, 1 reward. The question is, look, you're using that wording though. Anyway, there's a whole discussion there. But if a person doesn't believe in this whole theological thing, even as a Sunni, let's say, in this whole theological discussion, they will explain it like this. They'll say, look, this idea of tasweeb, why is it there? Not because of a theological discussion and all of that. No, I don't believe in that. They'll say the least is that it's a fiqhi discussion. Why? Because when the floodgates of ijtihad were opened, to the point where anything you don't have Quran or Hadith for, anyone can use their mind and just come up with something that kind of makes sense to them subjectively. Okay? When you open these floodgates, you have a lot of problems that comes with it. You have a lot of people missing the target, hitting the target. You know what? I feel that I am going to just say that I believe in tasweeb. Everyone's right. What's wrong with that? Allah doesn't have a rule here to begin with. Or He'll change the rule in favor of all the different opinions that are out there. Alright? So brothers and sisters, I want to wrap up with this. With tasweeb, the Shi'i school of thought doesn't believe in this. Shi'i school of thought does not believe in tasweeb. We are the school of taqti'ah. Now, when it comes to the Sunni school, some of the Sunnis might not believe in tasweeb at all. Some believe in it. Those who believe in it, Burujerdi said they believe in it because of theological reasons. Others say, no, they believe in it because there's so many viewpoints now, so much ijtihad going on, they have no choice but to say that we are going to say everyone's right. And then there's a third group that will be even less than that. That is to sum it all up. Any questions before we end tonight, inshallah? On tasweeb and taqti'ah. Yes? Okay, it's a very good question. I kind of hinted at it through the discussion. Question is this. Are there any proponents of the idea in the Shi'i school of thought that if you did your proper ijtihad, you used the right methods to get to a conclusion that your ijtihad was right, even though you might have not hit the target, correct? But since you did your due diligence, you did what you were supposed to do, you stayed away from the wrong forms of ijtihad, like qiyas and so on, then we can say you're right. My answer to that is, that's why I put quotation marks. I said, can both of them be quote-unquote right? And I said it depends on your definition of right, okay? If your definition of right is hitting the target, then Shi'i believes no. You can't get it wrong, but we say you were right. But the Shia will say you're right in the sense of you did your due diligence, you did your ijtihad, you missed the target, so you're still rewarded for what you did, but I'm sorry, you didn't hit the target, you were wrong, you're excused. You're excused. Okay? So some Ahl Sunnah also believe in this, I have to say, okay? Now, that's why I said some. I keep stressing on this, some. And I keep also stressing that I'm getting this from our books and the discussions that our scholars have given us. I haven't looked directly at their sources, but usually these discussions are pretty accurate when the Shi'i scholars talk about it. And it's been there for a long time. These discussions have been there for a very long time. So this is a very good point. We have to keep it in mind. You can be right, although you missed the target, but in the sense that you're excused because you missed the target. You're right because your methods are justified. But at the end of the day, you didn't hit the target. Yes. And so you're excused, and Allah will make it up to you if you missed out on something because you thought it was haram or you thought it's not wajib. Okay? Does that answer the question? All right. All right, so now that we have an actual waqi', we still have a real ruling of God that we're trying to hit or miss, now that we understand that that's the school of thought we come from, then we have to talk about when a mujtahid does his work, what's he exactly trying to get to? What is the exact target he's trying to hit here? Okay? There's a very important discussion there. It's called hujjiyah. We'll talk about that. Yes, brother? Exactly. You can never know what is in the ilm of Allah. You have to try to get as close as you can, and that's where the discussion of hujjiyah comes. So the brother says that's my question, inshallah, for our next session. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Salawat. متوجه زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ولد الحسين. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء ومعين الضعفاء والفقراء. أيها الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان. الأمان الأمان من فتن الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Brothers and sisters, there's a request for the recitation of Surah Fatiha for the family of Brother Sadiq Makhraj who provided the niyaz today.